I can't believe it. You actually came back? You're braver than I thought. Well, let's see how brave you are after tonight's video. We'll be discussing 5 true stories of haunted ships. Our first story involves the night that the SS Arthur M. Anderson received a distress call about 32 years too late. It's called A Nautical Ghost Story from My Sailor Uncle.
I was just talking to my uncle, who is a retired sailor, and he told me a story that I felt was perfect for this subreddit. My uncle used to work on board the Great Lakes freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, and they would haul iron ore and limestone across the Great Lakes. One day, at around 7 p.m. in November 2007, they were crossing Lake Superior on their way to Cleveland, Ohio, when they started receiving distress calls on their radio from an unknown vessel claiming to be the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald famously sank in 1975, taking all 29 crewmen with it. Well, he said, at first they all thought it was some kind of distasteful prank, until they checked the radar and found that there were no other ships around for at least 70 nautical miles, and the range on the radios are only 60 nautical miles. He said that the voice they heard from the radio described a heavy storm and high winds, and that they were having a hard time holding their own. My uncle said you could hear true fear in the man's voice from over the radio. But the thing was, there was no storm at all. In fact, the water was calm and the night was clear. At around 8 p.m., my uncle describes the distress calls on the radio came to an abrupt stop, leaving the whole room in a terrifying silence, and the radio stayed quiet for the rest of the night. Nobody was able to sleep that night, haunted by what they had witnessed. When it comes down to it, there is a sense of irony in this event, being as not only is the ship my uncle was on, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, the sister ship to the Edmund Fitzgerald, but it was also the last ship to make contact with the Edmund Fitzgerald in 1975 when she sank. Could my uncle and his shipmates have actually made contact with the ghosts of the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald, or could there be another explanation to this event? We'll never know, but it made one of the creepiest stories I've ever heard.
Wow, that is one hell of a creepy story indeed, and a sad one. Imagine receiving a distress call that you can't possibly reply to. Anyways, our next one comes from a Navy sailor who had an experience I doubt he'll ever forget. It's entitled, My Strange Experience with a Ghost Ship While Serving in the Persian Gulf.
I haven't talked about this with very many people except a few friends over beers late at night, but I figure it's getting close to Halloween and there's no better time than now. It doesn't seem real even now as I'm trying to relive the incident. I was in the Navy for 4 years and I've seen a lot of strange things out in the middle of the ocean, but never anything like what I'm about to describe. One of the commands I was stationed at was on a coastal patrol boat in the Persian Gulf. Our primary tasking, among others, was to board fishing vessels and freighters to look for weapons, contraband, and narcotics. For security and privacy reasons I won't reveal the vessel, crew members, or command names. One July evening in 2015, we were sailing in the northern portion of the Gulf off the coast of Iran. We received a distress call from a freighter around 2200 hours or 10 p.m., stating that he had spotted a fishing vessel not under power, meaning it isn't being driven, and drifting in the middle of a fairly populated shipping lane. He also stated he had seen no lighting, signals, or ship's crew, which led him to believe it was abandoned. We took down the coordinates and arrived in the area half an hour later. Finding the ship was difficult, but we were able to locate it using NVGs, night vision goggles, and radar. Upon locating the vessel, we manned up one of our boarding teams, including myself, in an effort to climb aboard and sort out the situation. We had to be cautious. It isn't unheard of for ISIS and Taliban forces to rig trap boats for us to board and then detonate them. A few sailors were unalived 2 years before my deployment in the same way. We boarded safely and began our search. My team of 3 were directed to check out the lower decks, which included the crew's quarters and the engine room. We didn't find a shred of evidence that any people had even been living on board, which was extremely strange. I've boarded a lot of boats, and most of the time these guys live on these things for weeks on end. And to be brutally honest, they don't smell very good, and are usually pretty messy because of the lack of fresh water for bathing, cleaning, or going to the bathroom. The crew's quarters were extremely clean and eerily empty, which gave me an odd feeling that this may be an ambush of some kind. I'm not an explosive ordnance and disposal tech, but we were all trained to look for explosives, just not to disarm them. After a thorough search for any sign of explosives which came up clean, we came to the conclusion that the crew may have transferred to another vessel if this one broke down mechanically. We searched the engine room for signs of scuttling, intentional flooding, unintentional flooding, or engine failure, and found no evidence of any of these. Our captain came over our headsets explaining that the only option we had based on the situation at hand was to rig the vessel for tow and haul it to the next port of call we were headed to. After securing the vessel to ours with a heavy steel cable and a huge rope designed for this specific purpose, we headed on a southerly course to continue our evening patrol. It's around 0300 in the morning, and I'm on night watch with 2 other guys in the pilot house of our boat. We had a roving lookout that would walk around the top deck with a rifle and scan the water and the sky for anything relevant. The lookout comes over the radio saying that he sees blue lights on and under the fishing boat we are towing. He says that he can see dark shapes moving around on the top deck as well through his night vision, and they look like people. He asks for one of us to come and look, so I walk down, and sure enough I see the same thing he's seeing. Shadowy figures are walking around the deck, and there are lights moving erratically around them and in the water around the boat. People are discernible through night vision. These figures looked like shadows in the shape of people, almost like transparent in a way. The scene was not something I can describe as I would like. I guess you'd have to have seen it for yourself to know what I mean exactly. I ran down to the captain's quarters to tell him what we were seeing and have him come up and take a look. When he got to the aft end of the ship, and I'm not even exaggerating, right when we got there a thick fog started to roll in and almost engulfed the entire area around us. It's hot in the Gulf, and the humidity does produce a natural haze on the surface of the water at times. But this fog was unlike anything I had seen. It was like a white blanket, and all we could see was the starlight above and this fog closing in. We all just stood there not knowing what to say, honestly, our captain included. Before long the fog had pretty much consumed the fishing boat, and we lost sight of it. The tow line suddenly became extremely tight, as if the fishing vessel was pulling in the opposite direction. This was dangerous because if that line snapped it could hurt someone on deck because of the material it's made out of. Our captain shouted the order to break the tow rig. Before we could set to work to unrigging it, the line just fell slack and dropped into the water. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see anything 20 feet in front of me. We hauled in the tow line to find it had been severed clean through. This line is designed to haul many tons, and it's extremely difficult to cut. It looked almost like it had been cut with a massive razor, it was so clean. Our captain never called in the incident, and his explanation was that the boat may have had stowaways that were hiding on board, and that's what we were seeing. We searched that boat from top to bottom, and I was there to witness it with my own eyes. There was nobody on board, and this wasn't the work of a stowaway crew playing some prank on the US Navy. I have never believed in ghosts or the paranormal, but I don't have any other way of explaining this incident other than that. We talked about it amongst ourselves for a few weeks about the whole thing, and not too long after we were notified that another patrol boat had seen something similar not far from where we were. We had witnessed the incident. The phenomenon has become somewhat of an inside joke amongst the sailors and marines of that area, and they are known as the phantom sailors of the Persian Gulf. Looking back on the situation now, I still can't believe it happened. It was surreal, and at the same time so vivid. Like I said, I haven't really recited this story a whole lot, save with a few friends, because I know it sounds crazy. To this day I'm not entirely sure what I saw, but I know I won't forget it for the rest of my life.
Holy crap, is that creepy. It's almost like a Persian Gulf version of the Flying Dutchman. Next, we have one from another Navy sailor who had an experience on the ship he served on. We call it the Haunted US Navy Ship.
I'm a firm believer that most U.S. Navy vessels are haunted for a plethora of reasons. I've heard countless sailors share their own personal experiences on board different ships, so here's mine. For the safety of my own self, I won't be sharing the ship I experienced this on in question, nor will I share my rate, name rank, etc. I've been in the Navy a little over a decade, and the majority of that career has been spent on the night shift. Well, one night, myself and 4 other fellow sailors were working in the wee hours of the morning. Working hours were 1900 hours to 0700 hours, which is 7 p.m., 7 a.m. We worked on the 7th deck in an engineering space. Well, one of us was called up to the main deck for some reason, so he left. I watched him go up the ladder. Well, there's only one way in and one way out of this space. Only 3 to 5 minutes after his departure, the hatch to the pump room adjoining the space we were in burst open, like someone was mad. Those of us left down there looked at each other, remembering the hatch was dogged down. 2 seconds later, the guy who left seemed to be walking in the adjoined space. There are 4 ballistic windows where you can see between the spaces. He almost floated. I always say he looked like he was riding a skateboard. He looked at none of us and then disappeared. Sketched out, we all went out to investigate, only to find an empty pump room. Freaked out, we ran back in and called the office asking for this person. He was still up there. Days later, we decided to shut the lights out in the pump room and take flash pictures. The majority were lame and vacant until we got to the back corner, where we captured a face staring at us on top of a toolbox. I don't know where that image is today, as I didn't take the picture, but it still haunts me. It was smoky and very clearly looking straight at us. Other than that, people have been shoved, seen old men in old uniforms walking the P-ways, and even hear people walking up aggressively behind them on the deck plates, myself included, when no one else is around. Ships are most definitely haunted.
Well, with everything that can happen on a Navy ship, like accidents, people lost during wars, etc., I bet most Navy ships has their fair share of ghosts. Before we get into our next tale, I just want to take a moment to remind you to, assuming your hands are not trembling with terror at the moment, hit like and subscribe. It'll really raise our spirits, so to speak. And if you don't, I swear I'll come and haunt your house. I'll rattle chains at all hours of the night, yell boo while you're trying to sleep. I'll raid your fridge, and I'll, try on all your clothes and stuff. Just a lot of scary stuff. Next, I think it's about time we shipped out on the Queen Mary.
The December before the pandemic, my husband and I attended a party on the Queen Mary and rented a room on the ship for the occasion. I was very excited, as I had never been on a ship like that before. I had also heard stories about one of the pools being haunted by the ghost of a little girl. After the party ended around 11 p.m., we changed our clothes into something more comfortable because I wanted to wander the ship and explore. They kicked everyone off the ship who wasn't staying the night there. We spent a couple hours wandering that amazing ship inside and out. Before we finished up, we went back down to the level the party had been on, only now it was completely empty. Same level as the pool, by the way, which they had closed up. But you could still look through the windows, which I absolutely did. I spent a good 5 minutes with my face pressed up to those windows before we walked on. I didn't see anything. After walking down a short hallway, we were in the enormous empty ballroom, which had been so bustling just a few hours earlier. My husband picked up a broken drumstick left behind from one of the bands. Just then, from the direction of the pool came a loud child's laugh coming towards us, as if a little kid was running our direction down the hallway, laughing loudly. I immediately lock eyes with my husband. "It's just a kid," he says dismissively. But there is no kid. We are alone on that entire floor. I look at my watch and it says 1:01 a.m. We go back to our room, seeing no one else along the way. Once in bed, I start Googling about Queen Mary ghost stuff. I found a forum that mentioned a common occurrence is hearing children's laughter around the pool area. We then discussed how we never saw any children that night, even during the party, which was for 21 and over, so why would we? We went to sleep feeling in awe and a tad eerie. I can still hear that laughter in my mind clear as day.
You know what? That's probably it. The kitty ghost was a tad bit upset that they couldn't go to the grown-up party. And once it was over, they decided, hey, it's our turn to have some fun. Next, we have one from a merchant mariner that spends some time chasing someone, or is it something? We call it My Experience Working Deep Sea.
This was about 6 years now, in early 2014. I'm a merchant mariner and at the time was working on an American-flagged car carrier in the engineering department as an oiler. My whole life growing up I've had some rather strange things happen, seen some things, felt some things, etc., but this is the first time I've had it happen on a ship I was working on. I was on the midnight to noon watch with the third engineer. When I was in the middle of my readings one evening I happened to notice an orange blur in my peripheral vision on the deck below, which was the lowest deck in the engine room. I turned my head and caught just a glimpse of orange coveralls walking down the shaft. This wasn't the engineer or anyone else in engineering, as we didn't wear coveralls. Our work outfit consisted of cargo or mechanic pants and whatever shirt you owned. The deck guys, however, did wear orange, so I finished up my reading and walked down to the lower level to find the guy. I thought maybe it could have been the able seaman on night watch, but they don't make rounds in engineering spaces, but whatever, so I go down there and no one's there. Whatever, probably just tired, I thought, and finished my rounds. After finishing up I turned in the sheet to the third in the control room, then stepped back out to go start on a project when I saw the door to the tool room or machine shop flap closed. Again, I thought probably a decky down here to steal a tool or something. So of course I go to the shop, and as I entered the shop the door to the storage room was just closing. I continue to follow, but there's no one in the storage room, and the only other way out would be through steering and up onto the main cargo deck. I continued into steering. Gave a quick glance around again, I found nothing. On my way back out I glanced into the hydraulics room when I finally saw him. He was facing away from me looking at a panel, and I almost just walked past. I caught myself mid-step and shouted over the sound of the steering pumps to get his attention. The man jumped and was turning around when the ship lost power. Losing power was nothing new. This ship has had a faulty shaft generator for a while. It was pretty standard. I didn't think anything of it until I got my flashlight out of my pocket and the man was gone. Like he was never there. I looked around, but nothing. I was starting to get a little nervous and jumpy at that point, but right before panic could set in the diesel generators kicked in and lights were restored. I returned to the control room to ask the third if a decky had left the engine room through there. He said no. Cut to a few days later, I was talking with the bosun's mate in the deck locker when I noticed a picture hanging almost as if it were a memorial, and I asked him about it. The bosun said it had been there for a while. The ship used to be Swedish flagged and they had a death aboard back then before it became US flagged. I sort of went quiet, then told him what I saw a few days ago, and he just goes, oh yeah, we catch glimpses of him roaming the cargo decks sometimes too. I didn't have anything else happen that trip, and we even got the shaft generator fixed in the next port, but still it was sort of wild having that happen in the last place I'd ever expect.
Wow, I bet you're the only dude in history that actually scared a ghost, because usually it's the other way around. Well, I bet after these stories, you're all content on being landlubbers. After all, that was some scary stuff tonight, wasn't it? But do you know what is not scary? Hitting like, subscribe, and sharing this video. It'll really help us keep the ghosts at bay. However, if you prefer podcast, then you're in luck, because we also release our videos in podcast form on Spotify. And of course, if any of you have a story to share, then by all means, drop me a line in the comments. But I do want to thank you for stopping by, and I hope the stories we told won't be giving you too many bad dreams. But if they do, then maybe you shouldn't run from them. After all, sometimes it's better to embrace your nightmares.